Hi, welcome to the Sunday Shelfie. I'm Nikki, the obsessive bookseller, and today we are on week 2 of 9 of my young adult collection. I talked a lot longer last week than I thought I would. I didn't realize I had so much to say about these books that I've been essentially ignoring for the last couple of years. It does help matters a bit that the ones we are going through are ones that I have read already, so the ones that I absolutely hated have been cleared from my collection already, so we're just like the cream of the crop of my read stuff. And we're continuing with more of those today. If you're new to this series, I'll link the full playlist in the description, and let's go look at some books. Okay, starting out with Perfect Ruin by Lauren DeStefano. At the end of last week's video, I mentioned how much I absolutely loved the Chemical Garden trilogy by this author, so I thought, okay, I'm going to pick up everything she has because holy cow, this is good. I did not care for this novel. My biggest problem is that all of the selling points for the story, all of the cool things, were kind of happening on the periphery of the narrative. So something really pivotal happened, but the main characters weren't involved. It just happened around them, if that makes sense. Yeah, kind of weird pacing and not a lot of meaningful plot advancement. So yeah, did not love that one as much as I thought I would. Then I have the Spiderwick Chronicles. This is such a cool series for adults and kids. It's one of those that I felt read really well as an adult. It's got a lot of illustrations in it. It's a fun story. The movie did a good job setting the mood, but it cut out almost these two entire books, and the elements that were in these two books were actually my favorite of the series. So the movie was entertaining, but left a lot on the table, so yeah, that one's really fun. Really quick reads. Salvage by Alexandra Duncan. Kind of a futuristic young adult love story. I liked the concept, and I enjoyed this first book, but the last 25% I think I kind of hurried through because I didn't really care for the direction the story took. I thought it was a little long-winded. And then to boot, there is a second book, but it's not a continuation, it's a companion novel, and we all know how I feel about those. So yeah, decent read, but you know, nothing super exciting. Angel Fall by Susan E. I freaking loved this book. I thought it was so cool. I thought it was so well done. It's a post-apocalyptic story where angels take over Earth. And I thought it was sufficiently eerie. I thought the pacing was on point. All of the ideas were so cool. Loved that book. And then did not care for the continuation. I think these ones focused way too much on the love story for me. And then I didn't care for where the story went or how it ended. So for me, if I consider this as a standalone, one of the strongest things I've ever read. The trilogy as a whole, though, meh, 3-star, 2-star. This first book, man. As with last week, there is a theme here of me really enjoying the first book, but then the series petering out by the end. I really don't know what it is about the genre that calls for that. It's possibly because to make more money, they often stretch out the story into trilogies when, truthfully, it could have been told in either a duology or a single book. But Court of Fives by Kate Elliott. I'm very interested in giving this one a try, even though I haven't read anything by this author. She's an adult fantasy author. My biggest draw to this one is an element of competition. Kind of like Ninja Warrior obstacle courses. I thought it was such a cool idea for a story. And it was decent. I feel like more should have been done with it. But then the story took a weird direction for that one for me as well. It focused on all the things I wasn't interested in. And then I got to this one and thought, you know, a lot of the stuff going on in here doesn't feel very plausible to me. And it was just a little bizarre. And I think I read the third one, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. It didn't stick with me. So liked the first one. It was pretty good. And then didn't like the second one. Mythos Academy by Jennifer Estep. Touch of Frost is the first book. This is an author who normally does paranormal romance. She's got a spider series. I thought the first few books in this series were really entertaining. If you liked House of Night, this is essentially that, but with mythology. instead of vampires and werewolves. School setting, fun elements, lots of magic. So I really enjoyed that. And then I think these are out of order. But one of these books used the trope of the falsely accused, and it was the most poorly done version of that trope that I've ever read. It was so torturous to read. I did not enjoy it at all. And then absolutely hated where the series ended. So for me, the first 4 books are really good, and I really didn't like the last 2, but it was a fun story. The Jewel by Amy Ewing. Girls in pretty dresses in a slightly dystopic era. I didn't like this one as much as The Selection or Wither, but it was still a pretty fun read. This is one that depended heavily on the development of the society working, kind of making it feel robust, and unfortunately it fell just a little short for me. And while I liked the idea in it and I thought it was a fun read, it did not develop into where I was hoping it would, but you know, I liked the first book for what it was. Then we have Nightingale by David Farland, signed by the author. The reason I found this one fun is because it was set in kind of areas that I've been to. So when he describes this person traveling around this city, I could picture everything. And so that's always kind of fun. I didn't... it was very heavily focused on music, and that's not something that really drives me when reading books. This kid is a guitarist. There's something to do with magic in this. So I didn't love this one, but it was fun to read for the sake of familiarity. Scarlet by Ac Goggin. This is a Robin Hood retelling, and it was done really well. Such a cool book, very interesting. I still haven't made time to read the third one. I enjoyed the second one pretty well also. If you like Thieves and kind of like a classic story retellings but with a good twist, that's a really good one to pick up. But, grain of salt, I haven't read the third one yet. I haven't felt compelled to go back and reread, so I can pick it up, but I liked it. Aeon, Dragon Eye Reborn by Alison Goodman. Asian fantasy, something to do with dragons, and truthfully, I don't remember anything about it. Yeah, cool cover. There's more in the series out now. It might be a duology, but haven't really done much with that. The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale. If you love fairy tales with a really charming, good writing style, and just a fun, feel-good story, Shannon Hale is the way to go. Goose Girl is such a charming book. This is technically middle grade, but I think teens would have large young adults like me would have no problem reading that one. Once Dead, Twice Shy by Kim Harrison. I absolutely love this author's Hollows series, so I thought, okay, I'll give the young adult series a go. I read the entire trilogy in one sitting, and it was just okay. Lots of unnecessary drama perpetuated by the character, just to kind of extend the plot, but yeah, I could probably leave that one. If we're taking it or leaving it, I could probably leave that one. It was nothing to write home about for the genre. There are so many other paranormal teen books that I liked more. Seraphina by Rachel Hartman. The idea for this story is really good, but it is one of the most dry reads I've ever come across. The concept is interesting, the characters are interesting, but the way the story was executed left a lot to be desired for me. I'd actually wish I could read the exact same thing, but written by someone else. Oh my gosh, that is so rude. No disrespect, because I know a lot of people really love that very dry, serious, historical type of vibe, but for me, I felt like with such a cool concept, it could have been a lot more fun, and the pacing was really off on this. I feel like there was a bunch of places where it could have been tightened considerably, and I think maybe I would have been more engaged. Steeplejack by Aj Hartley. This book is so bizarre, but it is freaking cool. It takes in some South African culture and kind of like gargoyle, not roof hopping, but these steeplejacks are really proficient at climbing, going up the side of buildings or whatnot, and it's a weird mystery novel. It is such a cool book. Like, one of the most bizarre yet awesome things I've ever read. The second one was meh. You know, it was okay. Pretty decent. And then we jumped the shark in the third one. I love this cover, but it was so ridiculous, and I could not suspend my disbelief for it to work for me, and I just, yeah, did not like how it wrapped up. But the first book, so good. Oh my gosh, we have an exception here to my, like, end of series woes. So Hex Hall by Rachel Hawkins. Paranormal, school setting, like, one of the funnest things I've ever read. I love this series so much. It was so charming. All of the tropes that people complain about, that I sometimes complain about, are in here, but this is a perfect example of all of them done well. I was totally invested the whole way through. I devoured the whole thing. I love it so much. And every book was as good as the last. And then there's another companion fourth book following a different character, but I liked that one as well. And I thought I owned it, so that's a weird oversight. I'm going to have to look into buying that one. And then The Floating Island by Elizabeth Hayden. Her adult Symphony of Ages series is one of my all-time favorites. The first book is so bizarre, and it takes about 100 pages for it to really get going. And so I don't endorse it very often because, like, here, you need to read a fourth of the book before you can even possibly decide if you're going to like this. But she has one of the most beautiful writing styles, incredible world development, non-human characters, really rich, developed cultures, and she took all of that and applied it to a middle grade series set in the same world. And it is so cool, so much adventure. Like, where was this when I was a kid? I would have absolutely loved it. And even as an adult, I just think it is so cool. And I recently read The Thief's Queen's Daughter, and it wasn't quite as strong as the first book, but still, compared to everything else, awesome. Can't wait to read more. The Tiger's Cursed by Colleen Hook. I like this book. Really awesome, like, exotic feel to it. So it's a little bit unlike anything I've read before, and I really like that aspect. For me, the pacing really suffered. I feel like the story could have clipped along quite a bit better, and I would have enjoyed it more then. And it also is one of those that leans a little heavier on the romance side, which would have been fine had it not kind of dominated the plot when there were a lot of other interesting things that could have been talked about. So I have not continued, even though I have a few others in the series. I've talked to a lot of customers who, like, absolutely love this series. It's one of their all-time favorites. And, you know, for me it was just okay, but I appreciate a lot of things about it. And then I have my, like, I love these beautifully readable small trades of Redwall and Mossflower. I wish the rest of the series had been introduced in these, like, Firebird fantasy versions. I talked a lot about Brian Jacks in my other Sunday Shelfie series, so I won't go into it too much here. The Crestomancy Quartet by Diane Wynne Jones. Oh! So if you happen to have caught my romance Sunday Shelfie, then you might recognize Jones. There's another author up there called Linda Winstead Jones, and I kept saying, I think I'm going to like her, but I'm not sure why. Yeah, it's because I'm confusing her with this author here, who I do like. Two different authors. Anyway, this is a compilation of 4 books. It's a magic school, essentially. I've heard a lot of comparison to Harry Potter. For me, this one has all of the great ideas. It is really cool, but it wasn't as accessible to a young reader. I read it as an older teen, and I thought it was just a little dense. Just a little dense, not quite as accessible. It's probably, it reads like, you know how some classic fantasy feel a little heavier and dated just because they're written in a different time? That's how this one feels, even though I'm not sure when it was written. But for pure fun magic, and if you're in the mood for a magic school story, like, this might be a fun one to look into. Firelight by Sophie Jordan. Young adult paranormal romance where the main character is a dragon shifter. Like, that's pretty freaking rad. The problem is the dragon shifting is really secondary to the love story, which isn't fantastic, but I'm really picky with love stories. But I really love the concept. And as a whole, like, the series is probably a solid 3 stars as a whole. I don't think that the end books were weak at all. I think it kind of like maintained its status of quality, which is something I have not been able to say for a lot of the other books on these shelves. So at least that's pretty good. Control by Lydia King. Back when I very first got started on NetGalley, I requested an arc of this one, and I liked it okay. It was kind of slightly dystopic, but these genetically altered kids, I don't remember a ton about it, but it was a little grittier than what I had read before, and I am pretty sure the author is studying medicine, so she brought a lot of credibility to the story. And it's not a standalone. There are 2 books, but I've never felt compelled to pick up the second one. I just wasn't invested in the characters as much as I would have liked to have been, but pretty cool. Altered kids, you know, like different, not superpowers, but abilities, so that's always fun. The Planet Thieves by Dan Krokos. This was such a fun book. I don't remember a whole lot about it. It's one of those that's really accessible for the younger aged wanting to get into sci-fi. There are a lot of fantasy options for middle grade. There are not a ton of sci-fi. So this one was a cool series. Oh, the Hunter series. I love this one so much. It's a post-apocalyptic world. These monsters have kind of taken over. And there are like little city hubs where everyone is mostly safe, but they do have to go out beyond the walls for whatever reasons. And so it's a school setting for people to become hunters. And this girl is kind of from the backwoods, so she's kind of ostracized because she isn't from here. Anyway, that's such a horrible way to describe all of this. But Mercedes Lackey, this is one of my all-time favorite things that she has written. And for me, it did not end conclusively. It left so many things on the table. I don't know if it got dropped. I know someone mentioned it in a comment on my review on Goodreads, but I can't remember exactly what they said. But perhaps this one might be getting a self-published continuation. We shall see. Such a cool series. This is one of the few that I would say, if you're an adult trying to get into a couple of YA, like, it's a pretty safe bet. It's a fun one to look into. Grave Mercy by Robin Lefevers. I feel like these were assassin nuns as well, so like a lot of people love Mark Lawrence's story. This is the YA counterpart, and I'm pretty sure this one was written first, but don't quote me on that. And it was decent. I like the setting, I like the atmosphere, I like the writing. I don't remember a ton about it, but I remember enjoying it. The only reason I didn't continue is that the next books each follow a different character, so there's not a lot of continuity there. And we all know that drives me crazy. Alienated by Melissa Landers. Such a fun story. Like, if Rory Gilmore hosted an alien exchange student, that's this novel. So much fun. I really liked her as a main character. I related to her a lot more. Of course, the alien is like a gorgeous, like, not really alien, but just human. I don't remember the exact premise of this. They may even be from Earth, but lived off planet for so long that now they're considered aliens. I can't remember. That would make the most sense. But a really charming, fun story, quick-witted, and I was sold. I like the world building on that one just a little bit too. And then this one, the continuation, was pretty decent as well. And I think I switched to audiobook to read the third one, and I think the narrator just killed it for me, so did not enjoy the third one as much. I do remember a slight element of competition in those last couple books, and I always love that. So overall, fondness for this one. Defy and Ignite, and I think there's a third book by Sarah Larson. I wanted to like this one a lot more than I did. It had a lot of fun elements, but everything was just a little too thin for my liking. I wasn't invested in the characters. The world building wasn't strong enough for me to really dig into that. And I couldn't even tell you what they are about, even though I read them. Well, it's been a while now, but I would say after the first like couple weeks after reading these, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what they were about. Oh, but signed, so that's pretty cool. This is a classic middle grade story, Shadows in the Water by Catherine Lasky. I've read this book several times when I was younger. It's one of those magical, like, feel-good stories where when you're reading it, you think, you know, that might actually be plausible. I could go ride dolphins in the ocean. Like, that's so much fun. Love that one. Recommend it highly. Okay, Gail Carson Levine, Fairy Haven and the Quest for the Wand. There's a whole series of chapter books called the Disney Fairy Saga, and they all stem from this one story. And I love those. We'll get to those on another shelf. This book has got illustrations throughout the whole thing. Of course, I'm not finding a lot on. A lovely storytelling. And I had read a bunch of those other chapter books before realizing that they kept referring to the stuff that happened in here. So it was really fun to go back and get the backstory, if you will. My old classic version of Call of the Wild. Give kids tiny books like this, because the novelty of reading a tiny book where you can go through the pages so quickly and with pictures like every few pages. I read this book over a dozen times, dozens of times. I would just sit down and read it cover to cover whenever I had a spare moment as a kid. And I think the format is one of the main reasons. Like, I love it. If I'm smart, I'll do some research and see if I can find more of these for my kids. But one of the few classic stories I have on my shelves that I actually liked. And of course it has to do with animals, so right there you know it's a safe bet. I Am Number 4 by Pittacus Lore, which, that's a pen name. I think it's the same author that wrote In a Million Pieces, that one biography that had a ton of controversy. Anyway, he tried his hand at young adult, like, fantasy in it. I mean, it was mildly successful. This first book was interesting. I read this one and then kind of got behind on the series and figured I'll wait until the trilogy is done and then I'll pick up the whole thing again. And they just kept coming out. There are so many books in this series now. And I feel like the concept is cool. You can't see it, but it says 3 are dead. I am number 4. So kind of aliens, I think. It's been so long since I've read these. I would really like to get back to that one at some point, but yeah, so many things on the list. Anyway, I have this copy of Legend here, but over the holidays I hauled the entire Legend series in hardcover, and I like this one. Of all of the teen dystopian novels that came out around the same time as Hunger Games and Divergent, Legend was probably in the top 5. Like, definitely one of the better ones that I read. I liked the characters and the love story better than a lot of the other ones. A lot of the things were at least plausible. It wasn't so ridiculous. Oh, and I love this cover. It's like, you can't tell, but it's a little bit 3D. Anyway, so if you like those other dystopians and you haven't picked up this one yet, it's pretty decent. Here's my attempt at getting into Sarah J. Maas. I read Throne of Glass. I thought it was okay. I enjoyed it. It was one of those really fun reads. I picked up Crown of Midnight and had trouble. Let me back up a little bit. I had trouble with this one and with the third book with the way the author writes the main character. I find her, like, her logic and her decision making so erratic and all over the place. Like, she would be thinking and doing one thing and then suddenly we're on a different track, and I could not figure out why. Like, is it just to advance plot? It drove me crazy. And I even tried the fairy tale one, like the Court of Roses. I can't remember the whole name. I tried that one, and the character in that one, I also had trouble with the decision making of the character. It's like her actions don't match her thoughts, and yeah, I don't know. Am I the only one who had that issue? So I loved the concept and the stuff introduced in the third book, but did not make it beyond that point because it was just really hard for me to wrap my brain around what this person was doing and why. Now, that being said, I picked up this one. It's the prequel, it's a set of prequel novels, and freaking love this book. This is awesome. One of my favorite YAs I've ever read. I really love the prequel. So at least I have something here that I really love from her, but yeah. So 2 separate series where the thought processes of the main characters drove me nuts. And that's why I have not picked up anything else by Sarah J. Maas, even though since I read these, she has absolutely exploded. So many people love this author. And I'm sitting over here feeling like I'm being left out. Like I really want to like them. I tried. And I don't have any qualms about anything else, like any other content in her stories, whatever, but I just don't like being in the character's head. Oh, and I would like to point out that, like, the whole premise, at least up to where I read, she's an assassin, but she never actually, I don't remember her ever actually practicing that field. And I found that a little bit of a bait and switch, like that's the promise. She's an assassin, but we don't actually do any assassinations. That was a problem for me as well. Little House on the Rocky Ridge. Read this a lot when I was a kid. And little did I know that it was part of a massive series. This is by Lee Mcbride, a different author than the Little House on the Prairie ones. But yeah, enjoyed that one for what it was, but that's not really my type of stories anymore. Pendragon, DJ McHale. I met this author and he was kind enough to sign my entire collection. Let me scooch down. And this is one of the coolest middle grade series I've ever read. I think this one was my favorite, Blackwater. And it's Portal Fantasy. And the best part of this Portal Fantasy is you actually get to go to multiple worlds. You don't just go through to one and then you're stuck there forever. Like, every single book had a different world that we got to visit. And it was just so creative and so much fun. And I loved the characters and I loved seeing where it went. And I even don't mind where the story ended up. This is one of the few that I thought maintained its strength through the whole thing. And yeah, one of the most delightful experiments I've ever undertaken. I must have met the author when book 8 came out. Anyway, so if you have a younger kid who is really struggling to get into reading, this might be a fun series. The Wicked Lovely series by Marissa Marr. I thought this was such a cool read. It is so wildly different from any other paranormal story in my YA section, and I thought it was the best at creating a cool atmosphere. The author gets major kudos for style and tone and just everything, all of the components that were infused into this book. So good. And I even thought the next couple were decent. I enjoyed the second one, and then for me, the story petered out, and it seemed like we were just like arguing back and forth for a couple of books. The plot really wasn't strong enough, in my opinion, to sustain a few more books. Like, the overall conflict just was not enough to keep me interested. I finished it, but I don't remember a lot about where it went because I was so uninvested. It was one of those I kind of had to force myself through. But this first book, you betcha, strong recommend. Not a Drop to Drink by Mindy McGinnis. This is another post-apocalyptic young adult that this one worked for me on so many accounts. It was written a lot grittier than a bunch of the other books in the genre. Mindy McGinnis kind of pushes the boundaries on what is typical in a young adult book, and it was just like visceral and rich, and like the stakes were high, but then consequences, like bad things actually happened. It wasn't just one of those, oh yeah, this is a deadly world, but no one actually dies. No, this was serious and really creative, frighteningly plausible, and I loved every single moment. Everything about it was so good. It was hard to read because it was so like vicious, but really good. And then the second book I enjoyed quite a bit as well. My only qualm is that I wanted a little more resolution, but luckily I met the author and she told me kind of if she had written more, what would have happened. And to me, that is so cool. Like, that's the ultimate dream, right? When you meet the author, you get a little more information than what is available to the mass. So, yeah. Really loved this series. Had finished both books before I met the author and was a fan going in, and loved that. Highly recommend those. This is another one that I would highly recommend if you're an adult reader wanting something a little more robust in YA. Rochelle Mead. For the longest time, she's my all-time favorite young adult author. I do love a bunch of stuff from her, and some of her works are still among my all-time favorites. This particular book was such a cool idea for a story. I thought it was well done. It was kind of like a magical adventure. It was a standalone, and so for me, it was over before I was ready for it to be. And that really is my only criticism. Everything else about it was lovely. I love the Asian inspiration. Basically, if you can't tell from the title, it's in a world where the sound doesn't exist, so people have to find other, obviously, there are plenty of ways to communicate, but I believe sound is part of the magic system, like the reverberations. I don't know, don't quote me on that. It's been a really long time since I read it, but yep, I'm glad I have that one. I really liked it. So that wraps up this week's tour. Thank you so much for joining me on today's Shelfie. I hope to catch you next time. Bye.